might as well be atheists as well. They attended an Anglican church from time to time as they were growing up, but he comes from a family on both sides of non-religious people. The idea of going to school, take theology, become a pastor, you know, don't misinterpret that. That really didn't have much to do with belief in God, right? It was an occupation. It was the sort of thing that a gentleman could do, and to keep himself busy. And besides, he didn't like it. Darwin himself, as he writes in his autobiography, was more of a believer than not. He didn't really follow in his father's footsteps until the voyage of the Beagle, perhaps from talking to Fitzroy, who was very Christian, who went the other direction. His wife Emma was religious in the sense that she attended church frequently, and feared a little bit for her husband's soul. That part appears to be true. The idea that he delayed publication because of that is very controversial. My own reading suggests that wasn't the reason. He did it for, you know, he was more aware of he wanted to establish his reputation before he came out with something that most people would recognize as being radical. In other words, he wanted to do it when his reputation was so secure that the people couldn't ignore him. And he shares a feeling that I often have. I actually find it difficult to publish something. It's never quite good enough. I keep rewriting it and changing it. You know, this talk would have been very different if I had till Monday to do it. If I had till next Friday, it would have been even different still. And he was like that a little bit, although he did publish a lot of stuff. But I think in this case, it was a complicated, difficult subject. He wanted to get it right. And I think that's a better explanation for the delay than that he was afraid that, you know, he would upset his wife. I mean, you know, when he finally did publish, you know, basically he said deal with it, and she did.
Well, that's why he put in chapter 6.
No, that was for his scientist friends.
And also his humility.
Well, no, so this is another myth. So a lot of people interpret, we were at the book club on Monday night, and everyone was saying how humble a man Darwin is. Okay. Well, he's actually not very humble, you know. It's just British understatement and subtle sarcasm. I mean, this guy is actually extremely confident by the time he writes Origin. Okay, he puts the words, you know, say, I'm such a humble man, you know. This is how it happened. You know, it's a little bit of a myth. By that time, he was pretty damn sure that he was right, and woe betide anyone who took him on. He would sick Huxley on him.
I heard recently that Darwin actually had Mendel's book, but hadn't read it.
No, he had the journal where the papers were published, but he hadn't read. These were times. So Mendel didn't publish a book; he published a paper, but he did have. These are times when journals were published with the pages were, 2 pairs of pages were folded over, so you actually had to cut along the edge of all the pages in order to open them up, and so the journal was never cut. So clearly he had never read the paper, but it doesn't matter. He wouldn't have understood it anyway. He was not a mathematical kind of person. And have any of you read Mendel's? There's a website called Mendel Web where the original papers are there. You can actually go and read them. It's pretty tough going. It's pretty tough to read Mendel's papers. It's not something you just go, aha, why didn't I think of that? It's, aha. So I'm not sure that even if he had read them, that he would have got it. But he relied very much on his circle of friends, and if they hadn't been talking about it, I don't think he would have paid much attention anyways. But no, he didn't read it. He didn't read things. Yes?
This is more of a biochemistry question.
Oh, good.
I was kind of surprised by the chart that you had that showed the amount of bacteria in simple cell organisms compared to plant animals.
That's this chart here?
That one.
Yeah, so it's a little deceptive because these are only sequenced genomes. Okay, and bacteria genomes are smaller, so many more of them have been sequenced, so it's a little bit deceptive. But I showed it because I want to emphasize that we don't know how many species of bacteria there are.
Oh,
But it's very likely that there are at least as many as everything else.
well, my
Okay.
question.
And so we need, that's a different way of thinking than Darwin, you know, ever knew. Okay. And we can actually relate to those species.
I was wondering though, I know there's a net loss of species when it comes to plant and animals these days, but is there a net gain or a net loss of bacteria? But
So is the number of species of bacteria increasing? And perhaps the numbers of species of plants and animals are decreasing these days? I don't know the answer to that question. Okay. I'm a little bit skeptical about the numbers that are being touted for loss of species. You know, nobody ever says all the new species that are forming. So, but I don't know the answer to the question. If there is huge, if we're in the middle of an extinction the way some people would imagine, then you know, I suspect the bacteria are suffering as well. Okay, they just don't have as powerful a lobby. Yes.
The meeting of the Linnaean Society where Wallace and Darwin's materials were read, I've read that like it was actually quite anticlimactic. Nobody made much of it.
Oh yeah, no, nobody cared. No.
Why? Like it seems like such a revolutionary idea to us. How come nobody picked up on it?
It's you read the paper, it's not that exciting. It's hard to appreciate just how, you know, there were much more exciting things going on, like some new canal being built somewhere. And that was just fine with everybody. Because Darwin wanted the opportunity to explain it. Not just a short paper presented to the Linnaean Society. He wanted to write the book on the subject. Okay? He wanted to explain the whole long argument. So he was not the least bit unhappy that it wasn't. It's not like there were headlines in the Times the next day saying, evolution discovered, you know. It wasn't like that at all. It took the book with the one long argument to really make the case. Wallace, by the way, was happy with that. He was no. Some of the creationists are arguing that Wallace was, you know, the regional discoverer, and he was very upset. And that's not. He was quite happy to turn over to Darwin. He realized that Darwin had priority, had much more data, much more evidence, and was a much better writer.
If Darwin had died at a young age, what would be different today in our understanding?
I don't think very much. I subscribe to the idea that evolution, in a sense, was in the air. What very likely to have happened was it would have come out bit by bit over a long period of time. It wouldn't have had the same kind of impact that it had when Darwin presented it all together in one massive case, one major book. So it would have come out little by little over a period of several decades. I'm not so sure that the general public would have been as aware of, just as the general public today isn't aware of the new ways of looking at evolution. You know, random genetic drift is probably completely strange and new term to most of you. Why is that? Because there wasn't a book published in 1978 that, you know, by some famous person who all of a sudden explained all this little by little, gradually, and so it doesn't have the same kind of impact. So the difference would have been we would be coming gradually to the realization that evolution was a fact and that natural selection was a major mechanism, but it wouldn't have had the same publicity, and the transformation wouldn't have been as quick, I imagine. Yes, back there.
I was just wondering, you mentioned that he was concerned about trying to explain instincts.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how much progress has been made and whether you think you would find it satisfactory.
Not much and no. There's a whole field called evolutionary psychology. So I'm sure you've read all the writings. Okay, this is why, you know, why are men superior to women? Well, because when we were, you know, back when we were cavemen, we used to drag them around by the hair and rape them and whatever, and that's why we behave the way we do today. That's a whole field called evolutionary psychology that's based on those kinds of stories that seem to have some evolutionary sense to explain